2003 in Ashby, Massachusetts. This videotaped interview is being done by the Ashby Historical Society, participating in this United States Veterans History Project, a project in which our veterans have been asked to share their stories while they were in the armed services. The tapes will be kept here in Ashby and will then be listed and cataloged at the Library of Congress. With us this morning is Mr. Stephen Longley, who's being interviewed by Janet Offris, and on camera is Ann Hayes. Mr. Longley, how long have you lived in Ashby?
Oh, approximately 18 years since retiring from the Fitchburg Police Department.
Oh, really? You were Fitchburg Police? Didn't know that. So, then let's go to your service. Did you go into become a policeman after service, or?
After service.
Right after the service. So tell us a little bit about when you went into the service and what branch you were in.
I enlisted in the Marine Corps December 11th, 1944. I came home from boot camp at Paris Island, staying with friends in Shirley, and they had a nephew who was a warrant officer in the Navy. And the first morning, coming down, pouring myself a cup of coffee, he was seated at the kitchen table. I joined him, and we sipped coffee for a while. He asked me what I did. I'd gone out with the guys, had a few beers, and kept looking at me. And I began to become a little annoyed. Finally says, Eddie, what's the matter? He says, how do you feel? I says, I feel wonderful. First day of my boot leave. He kept looking at me. Finally, he reached across the table, put the palm of his hand on my forehead, and he says, you're burning up with fever. I says, hey, come on, it's ridiculous, I feel fine. He says, I think you've got scarlet fever. So at that time at Moore Army Airfield, the Navy had a station there, Naval Air Station, and he called for the ambulance and the doctor to come up to check me, and sure enough, I had scarlet fever. So that put the kibosh on my boot leave. I ended up in the Chelsea Naval Hospital for what seemed like a ridiculous length of time. Evidently, in those days at least, they thought there might be after effects from the fever. Finally discharged from there. I was stationed at the Boston Navy Yard, along with real veterans that had come back from various operations in the Pacific. Here I am, a young boot just out of boot camp, and I took a little bit of hazing, actually.
I expect.
Finally, they got around to shipping me back to Camp Lejeune. And I was there in a replacement group. And we were there for quite some time at Hatnot Point, not Tent City. Finally, we got the word that we would be going overseas. And we were at Camp Pendleton in California for some time. And from there we shipped out from San Diego and to Pearl Harbor. We were there just a very short time, and we embarked again for Maui in the 4th Marine Division. I was a replacement in the 23rd Marines 4th Division, and they had taken very heavy casualties on Evo. And of the original company that I was in, I think there might have been a platoon, actually. So we were there going through the usual thing, maneuvers, so forth. And I don't forget how many months it was. It wasn't that long a period of time, and they dropped the bomb. When I enlisted at Boston, they told me they were not taking any more reserves in the Marine Corps, and I had to sign as a regular. Now, to this day, I don't know whether that was true or the recruiting sergeant was having me on a little. So I signed for 4 years. So now the war is over, and I had probably over 3 more years to put in. And the original 4th went stateside, and the replacements and the long-timers still had to stay on Maui. We were given a choice, or I thought we'd been given a choice. One detail was going to go to China, the other to Guam. I opted for China, and naturally, I ended up on Guam. And there I was in the 7th Separate Military Police Battalion. And we ended up guarding Japanese prisoners of war. I found that there really wasn't much to worry about. The Japanese knew that they were going to be repatriated, they were going home. And you couldn't have driven them out of the stockade. They were happy, no problems. One incident, when we first got there, we were at Island Command, and at the stockade there, and the Japanese mess cooks did their own rations for the stockade for the Japanese. And they used to shut the water off. By the time they thought everything was secured at the mess hall. But there was one poor devil who never made it. He was a pot walloper, and he just didn't secure in time to get to the showers before the water was shut on. Now the stockade had an inner high barbed wire enclosure and an outer enclosure. And just beyond the enclosure, by where our so-called barracks were, actually they had no flooring, just a dirt deck and a partition about waist high and a thatched roof. Well, this one Jap would go over both those fences under the gun tower and use our shower. Finally, one night, we caught him, and we brought him before the captain and explained his situation. He had some English, and the captain very graciously left the water on for a longer period so this prisoner could take a shower. The Japanese were very hygienic people, very clean. Of course, they were the enemy, but the war was over. Being relatively young as to the other members of my organization, they gave me the job of taking care of the supplies for the stockade, which I did nothing except drive down a Japanese officer who had a better command of the English language than I did. And he took care of all the logistics as to what to order and so forth and so on. So I just went along for the ride. But there were 3 very large quantity of warehouses. One warehouse had the supplies, rice and so forth. Another had the captured clothing, and the 3rd warehouse held our khaki and boondocker shoes that were to be issued to the Japanese prisoners. But instead, we issued the Japanese clothing that we had in the warehouse for them. As a consequence, I was in high demand because officers had to buy their own uniforms, and they could get by wearing enlisted men's khaki, more or less the same anyway. And also Navy chiefs, Navy officers. So the colonel in charge told me that if anybody came down for khaki uniforms, why, I'd pass them out.
Right.
As a consequence, we had officers coming in frequently, and I'd take them down, get their sizing and so forth. Really rough duty. And as a consequence, to show their gratitude, they would leave off libations, bottles of whiskey. So we had no problem with that. I had a 10-man Japanese working party, and I slept in one of the warehouses where the armament was kept for the Stockade.
You alone, or were you alone, or did some of you, was it a group that stayed there in the warehouse, or were you by yourself there?
I was by myself.
You were by yourself.
There was a lieutenant, but he was seldom present. He had a liaison with a certain young lady in Agana Heights. So we'd like to see him once a week, and that would be it. I was supposed to pick up the working party with a sidearm, either a 45 or a carbine. But as I said, they were going nowhere, so I just called and say, hey, send down my detail. Aren't you going to meet him? No, I'm not going to go anyway. They come down. I had one called Fats. He took care of the cooking. I didn't bother going to the mess hall because I'd also be open to giving the khakis and the boondockers to Navy chiefs who could get by wearing the same uniforms. And some of these chiefs were in the commissaries, so I was well taken care of. Steaks, brush eggs. So I never did bother going to the mess hall. This one Jap Fats would take care of the cooking. I'd also lay out my khaki in the morning and bring me over my coffee. So it was a pretty pleasant duty. Not bad at all.
Were there separate mess halls for the Japanese and for
Oh yeah,
Americans?
yes.
And you said that they had their own cooks
Their own cooks.
and their own food warehouse? Or was it all
Well,
together?
their supplies were taken care of in the outside the stockades, and then they were issued on a daily basis.
Oh, okay. A lot of rice.
A lot of rice.
How long did we keep them incarcerated?
Beg your pardon?
How long did we keep them incarcerated? After the war was over,
After the war was over, I'm trying to think now. It's just a matter of several months, I think, and they started to ship them off to Japan for the homeland. The only ones that didn't enjoy that procedure were the war crimes, Japanese officers that had eaten down flyers, livers, and hearts, and so forth. They were segregated from any part of the regular prison population. And when they were shipped back, they were headed for the long jump. They were going to be hanged.
did they admit to that?
Pardon?
Did they admit to that? That they?
Well, I have no idea whether they admitted to it or not, but evidently there was enough preponderance of evidence to show that they
Really?
had done this and they were going to suffer the consequences.
So were they under more strict
Definitely
You had-
more strict supervision.
supervision? So this was all in Guam.
right.
How did they go about sending the troops back? Was there some kind of, did they go by their length of time in service, or do you know how
No,
we did it?
I think that
It was just,
that once the war was over, they were released from service, because then the Japanese no longer had an army, they had no longer a military, so they were just right back into the civilian population.
so it was up to the army that was there to determine who went when, and
It was up to the military, our military, to decide how they were transported back, which would be by probably what Japanese transports were left. They'd utilize them. There was none of them that utilized American vessels.
very interesting. So, did you serve your 4 years then? Did you say? Or
An all-mark came through that if you enlisted prior to a certain date, which I had done, you could request discharge.
Okay.
And like a damn fool, I took the discharge, because this lieutenant that was a very nice officer told me, he said, he said, Steve, he said, there's going to be promotional exams in just about a month. And he said, I can just about guarantee you that you do well, probably get platoon sergeant stripes or gunnery sergeant stripes. I said, no, I want to go state
Just
sergeant.
get out.
Which I regretted later, because I re-enlisted, I don't think I was out a full year, and I re-enlisted in the Marine Corps.
Oh, really?
I can in Boston, and I served in the guard detachment at the Portsmouth Naval Prison, guarding general court-martial prisoners. And at that time, I had enlisted for 3 years. I'd met my wife, and got married, and she was not all that happy about my staying in the Marines, which was a foregone conclusion, because Johnson was the Secretary of Defense, and no chances of promotion whatsoever. So again, an all-mark comes through. And it was, if you hadn't attained a certain grade, you could request discharge. And my wife was adamant. She says, you're not going to stay in the Marines. And I agreed with it. At that time, it didn't look promising for any kind of advancement. So I took the discharge. And I don't think it was but a matter of, I don't think it was a matter of 6 months, if it was that the Korean situation came up. So I missed out again.
I'm sure your wife was glad you missed out
I'm sure.
on that one. So where did you meet?
I met her in Fitchburg. And
Is she from Fitchburg? Is she?
no, originally she was from Chicago, and then her family moved to Fitchburg.
So I'm curious about the Portsmouth. Now, is that still? We don't have that.
No, that's
Portsmouth
defunct. That all general court-martial prisoners go to Leavenworth now.
to Leavenworth in.
Kansas, I believe, with the prison there, maximum custody prison.
Okay. So was this one of the major ones at that time, Portsmouth? Was it?
That would be for the naval service, that would be the main custodial center for general court-martial prisoners.
How many do you, I guess this is an area that we don't think about too much. About how many would have been incarcerated at that time? And what would be some of their reasons, and how big an installation was it?
Any general court-martial offense, the laws of the Navy are called Roxman Shoals, and if you commit a general court-martial offense, you can rest assured you're Portsmouth bound, whether it's Navy or Marine Corps. And this the actual population at the time decided there were 3 subdivisions. There was maximum custody, which were the cell blocks. There was the minimum custody, which were 5 or 6 decks with 2 enormous squad bays on either deck. Probably a capacity of maybe 300 convicts, inmates, prisoners to a squad bay. And there'd be a master deck with a senior non-commissioned Marine officer, and on the decks there would be non-commissioned officers. The cell blocks were quite old, but they were serviceable. Homosexuality was a crime, and they were in the cell block, not in the general population. They were segregated.
Segregated.
Yeah. Mostly it involved with the officer inmates, embezzlement. They had been connected with commissaries, any handling of money. Some of them couldn't resist the temptation. I was a quarantine NCO, and I remember vividly this officer came in, leplets cut off, no designation or rank except the uniform itself. He still had the uniform only. I believe he was bused in from Boston. And piqued my interest, and I queried him. I said, "How the hell did you manage to end up here?" He said, "I gamble." Of course, he was gambling with commissary funds.
Somebody else's funds.
And it was rather sad because he was a Mustang, which means he came up through the ranks and becoming a commissioned officer. And the whole thing was blown. No pension, nothing, disgrace. But there were quite a few officers who were incarcerated there, and all sorts of crimes. Some deserters, rapists, the whole gamut, the whole spectrum of the criminal element was there.
What was the general attitude? I mean, if you could place a general attitude, I mean, they realized, of course, why we were there. What were their chances? I mean, I don't know that much about military, how long they would serve, what kind of trials they had.
It would be a military tribunal, nothing to do with civilian jurisprudence. They could be there probably at that time for 5 to 10 years, and then shipped into a federal point. They weren't mistreated in any way. I'm sure none of them wanted to be there, but they had to be.
I suppose they were allowed visitation and all this.
Pardon?
They were allowed visitation hours, I'm sure, or were they, or did anybody come to see them, or?
Usually, I don't recall any visitations.
Really?
The chances are they were from all their homes are from all different parts of the country. I really can't say I remember any visitations by relatives or, excuse me, whatever.
So curious why you chose the Marines?
Well, I'd read Guadalcanal Diary, and I had older friends that had gone in the Marines. And naturally, we thought the Marines were the best.
Yes. I think Ashby has a lot of Marines, ex-Marines, an unusually large number, I think.
Former Marines, I'm sorry to
Former
correct you,
Marines.
there's no ex-Marine, former Marine.
Well, they say once a Marine, always a Marine, something like that, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of, seem to be a lot of Marines. Well, about Camp Pendleton, was your training including going up and down the mountains and all this for your training? I remember
The
talking
usual,
about that.
again, we weren't there that long to spend any length of time there because they wanted to ship us out.
You were needed.
And so I know some of the guys that, we had some guys who were going back for the second and third times for combat, and they weren't too happy. But so anyway.
Now, you went to Pearl Harbor